Hello everyone, this is Rich LaPaix from the Nova Scotia Nature Trust, and the topic of this presentation is coastal island prioritization towards a collaborative, flexible, and representative approach to conservation planning. As the title indicates, this is a collaborative initiative with other key partners including the Canadian Wildlife Service, the Nova Scotia Department of Natural Resources and Renewables, Nova Scotia Environment and Climate Change, Protected Areas Branch, and the Nature Conservancy of Canada. It's also benefited from participation by a number of organizations within the Kespukwitk Conservation Collaborative, particularly in its earlier stages. What I'll be presenting on today is part of a larger project to advance conservation planning for coastal islands within Kespukwitk as well as throughout the province of Nova Scotia. And I'll be focusing on some of the tools that we've developed as a collaborative to support this, namely the Coastal Island Prioritization Toolkit. So in this slide is shown the overall project goals, and I'll be focusing kind of on this first point to create a database toolkit to inform prioritization and to guide and coordinate conservation strategies and actions for Nova Scotian coastal islands. Other project goals include strengthening partnerships, facilitating collaboration, and protected areas planning, and advancing the evidence base and legal protection of coastal islands. To set the stage a bit, I'd like to just share some photos of coastal islands. So this image is from the eastern shore of Nova Scotia. And as you can see, in some parts of the coast, islands are quite abundant. Overall, there's about 4,000 islands around Nova Scotia's coastline, depending on how you count them. And they vary quite a bit in terms of their character. So shown here is islands of different sizes. In the background, you can see a relatively large island, that's Borgles Island. And in the foreground, a number of small islands that are part of the Shiprock group. This photo is also taken from the eastern shore. So in addition to this kind of localized variation, islands vary quite a bit along different sections of the coastline, representing the very kind of unique water bodies that we have, being the exposed Atlantic Ocean, the Bay of Fundy, the Bredor Lakes, the Northumberland Strait, etc. These are the Brothers Islands along the Fundy shore near Parsborough. The Troop Island in St. Margaret's Bay, which you can see includes a nice hardwood stand on the island. This is Little Gooseberry Island off of Chester. McPhail's Island in the Bredor Lake. Bird Islands off the coast of Cape Breton, which includes Cebu Island here in the foreground, which has been designated as part of the Glooscap IPCA, and Hertford Island in the background. And here in Kespukwitk, this is Seal Island off the southwest tip of the province. And you can see kind of in the background the Mud Island group. Also in Kespukwitk, this is Pease's Island in the Tusket group. And as diverse as these islands are, so are the functions and values that we recognize them as being important for, including habitat for breeding and migrating birds, as places of high intertidal productivity in areas that support unique ecosystem types, such as old processed forests in some cases, and as places for recreation and opportunities to hunt and gather, as navigational aids, and for providing shelter of more inland waters. Although islands off the coast of Nova Scotia are still relatively intact overall, their character is shaped by varied histories of human use and ongoing pressures, including various types of development interests and activities, agricultural practices, problematic species including both native and introduced taxa, sea level rise, and other effects of climate change, amongst others. Brings us back to the project, the Coastal Island Prioritization Toolkit. The need for this project was first identified in 2018 during some conservation planning work here in Kespukwitk, where it was acknowledged that in many cases we have inadequate knowledge or data about coastal islands, and we lack a common conceptual framework to prioritize islands to effectively advance conservation actions and strategies to address threats. So the idea of Coastal Island Prioritization Toolkit was identified as an enabling strategy to support other strategies. What is a prioritization toolkit? Well, it's a decision support tool, and in this case includes a couple different components. One is a geodatabase of spatial information on the coastal islands. Includes information on indicators of pressures, species data, geomorphological, physical features, land cover, protected areas and other designations, and other information on coastal islands that partners can have access to help conservation planning initiatives. And it also includes summarized information on select coastal island attributes referred to as prioritization themes. And I'll talk more about these in following slides. And these are specific attributes of islands that we've brought forward that are particularly helpful for thinking about how we might want to prioritize islands for different purposes. And they include nested conservation targets and indicators of pressures. Before continuing further, I'd like to highlight the importance of ecological representativity to the project. So shown here is the distribution of islands around the coast according to 16 unique coastal segments, the segments being adopted from work done by Michelle Greenlaw et al. So not surprisingly, islands aren't evenly distributed along the coast, and they're very abundant in some sections or some coastal segments, such as in the Sheet Harbor area compared to others. Similarly, coastal segments don't currently benefit from similar levels of coastal island protection, with some areas having relatively high levels of protection, again, such as Sheet Harbor areas, whereas others have relatively low. To help facilitate prioritization of coastal islands throughout the province, we identified 12 prioritization themes, which represent indicators of pressures as well as measures of ecological importance or nested conservation targets. So they're listed here: level of disturbance, agriculture, sea level rise, recreational use, isolation as a bit of a proxy for exposure to problematic species, habitat richness, marine bird nesting, migrant bird stopover habitat, breeding boreal songbirds, rare plant communities, intertidal communities, and overwintering water birds. So for each of these themes, we ranked each island into one of three categories, represented on a scale of low, medium, and high, with corresponding kind of numeric ranks assigned to them. And I'll speak to those. So we don't have time to go through all of the prioritization themes, but just to give you a sense of what this looked like for the Lobster Bay segment. This is the disturbance theme. So islands were, in this case, categorized into different categories: disturbed, minimally disturbed, or undisturbed, depending on the percentage of the surface area which was within a disturbance layer that we had created to support the project. A similar approach was taken for other pressures, such as agricultural use, where islands in this case were categorized depending on whether they currently supported agriculture, had done so in the past, or whether there was no evidence of past agricultural use based on the spatial data that we had access to. In all cases, for pressures, scores were higher when they were kind of less disturbed or less threatened. So this was kind of assigned from a land securement kind of perspective. In terms of measures of ecological importance, same approach. So here is an example for marine bird nesting. We used available spatial data to categorize islands according to whether or not they had historical occurrences of nesting seabirds or other water birds. with a greater kind of weight being assigned to those islands that supported one or more species groups or guilds. For habitat richness, we used land cover data to classify islands according to the number of land cover types that were represented on islands, with lower scoring islands being comprised of one homogeneous land cover type and higher scoring islands being comprised of multiple ones. So classifying islands in this way provides us a simple and flexible way to conduct different prioritizations to reflect different strategies as well as organizational priorities and mandates. So shown here are the results of summarized island scores when multiple factors were weighted and summed to present a prioritization from a land securement perspective, shown in the leftmost figure, and a restoration perspective in the right. This is a matrix showing the relationship between the average value of the prioritization themes according to different coastal segments of the province. So when looked at this way, the prioritization ranks give us a better understanding of how islands vary in their condition, ecological importance, and threat exposure amongst different sections of the coastline, which is really key to kind of understanding how we might approach protected areas planning within a representative context. This work was supported by the Kespukwitk Southwest Nova Scotia Priority Place Funding Initiative, which was administered by the Wildlife Division of the Nova Scotia Department of Natural Resources and Renewables, as well as Environment and Climate Change Canada. It was also supported by grants to the Nature Trust from the Donner Foundation and the Bonell Cove Foundation, and really benefit from in-kind support by multiple organizations within the Kespukwitk Conservation Collaborative. So thanks to all those groups that supported this ongoing work. And thanks for everyone for listening to this presentation. I'll wrap it up here. And in case you're wondering what this photo is of, it's of sheep bonsai, so some trees that have been heavily grazed by sheep on Seal Island. Thanks very much. Bye.